Okay. Thanks, Doug. And thanks so much for having me here. And it's been great to be invited by Doug to come and join you guys for a really great cause. And so I'm glad to be part of that. I'm going to introduce myself first, and then I'll give you some resources, too, so we can go forward. My name is Jim Wallace. I do work as a police officer in Los Angeles County, and I've been there this is my 25th year. Worked a lot of different details over the years. This is how you had to look in the 80s in order to be a police officer. You had to have a flat top and a big mustache that cut everything at 8. But I eventually got wise. I was raised by a police officer also, so I was born in his academy. And growing up, I was not a religious person. My dad is an atheist. We did not go to church for that. My mom was a cultural Catholic, so she would kind of drive me to church, and I was not a believer growing up. My dad, being an atheist, would take me to Mass on Sunday and drop me off on the front steps of the church. I would go into the Latin Mass because it was the earliest Mass. Didn't understand a thing about it, but I was done by 8:30, and that was important to me as a kid. He would come back and pick me up from the steps. So that was kind of how I grew up. Was interested in law enforcement. I was in Explorers back when I was a teenager and eventually graduated from the Los Angeles Sheriff's Academy. We send our guys there as participating agencies. So my dad, before he retired, was able to pin that badge on me, which I thought was pretty cool. Been involved in a lot of different details, all of which during this time I was an atheist until I was about 35. Did 3 years in SWAT, 2 years in gangs, worked patrol, worked undercover for 4 years, got to grow my hair out. It was kind of nice. Had a big goatee for a lot of that time because my kids' pictures in kindergarten, you couldn't tell who was the mom and the dad in the pictures. So I used to grow a goatee, so when they would draw pictures, the two long-haired people, the one with the mustache was dad. So, but you get a chance. The first thing cops do when they get a chance to grow their hair is they grow their hair. Because the rest of your life, you have your hair really short, right? This is just required by the job. So anyway, after this period of time, I got a chance to work in investigations. I came to faith at the age of 35. And since that time, I had a chance to go back to school. My undergraduate work is a little bit different than my dad's. He was a cop from the time he came out of high school. I decided to get involved in the arts. I got a bachelor's degree in design, a master's degree in architecture at UCLA. But then when I got saved, I decided to go back to seminary, and I went to Golden Gate Baptist Theological and got a master's degree in theology. And I started pastoring, and now I get a chance to take some of the principles of cold case investigations, and that's all I work is cold case investigations. These are all cases from the late 70s and early 80s, and they're homicides. We get a chance to go back and use some of the same principles we use in cold case investigations and get a chance to teach these now across the country to people in church settings. So it's kind of neat to use these principles. I'm going to try to give you some tools that you can use today when assessing the evidence for creation. Pretty lucky, my dad, my son, who's here today, all of us have had a chance to work in this profession. So he should probably be teaching. I noticed that everyone who's teaching today is some stage of gray. I wish he was actually teaching this topic. You have a young guy doing it, but you've got me instead. I host a couple of websites when I was a youth pastor. All the apologetics work we did with students, we hosted at this site, pleaseconvinceme.com. So all the things we're going to talk about today are available to you there as well. And I also have a site called Answers for Atheists. These are short 500-word responses that you can give your friends or people you work with when you've got somebody who throws an objection during a conversation and it's like, man, I don't need a 20-page article. I just need to knock this down in 500 words so I can keep going. These are 500-word responses to the top objections of atheists. Just launched this site called Cold Case Christianity. Wrote a book last year. It comes out in January 1st called Cold Case Christianity. And this is a place we can now go to keep up on what we're doing with the book. All right, all that being said, I want to provide you guys with tools. So we're going to talk about some things, and we're just going to skim the surface of a lot of issues that are important when discussing how the creation speaks to a creator. And I want you to be able to go deeper if you want to. So how I typically do this is, the week after I do an event like this, I will send out, by way of email, links to all the PDF files, MP3s, videos, things we're going to talk about today. I'm going to give you more resources if you want them. And I typically do that by sending around a sign-up sheet. So if you want to sign up for our email, I will send you out a group email probably by Tuesday of next week. I'm in trial on a case from 1981, and we started picking the jury yesterday, so I'll be tied up all day, every day for the next month. But at night, I usually get home and try to get these emails out to you guys. So I'll be able to get those to you probably by Tuesday. All right, now we finally get a chance to get started. Let me talk about the similarities between working cold cases and investigating the Christian worldview. Look, cold case detectives do a certain number of things, and we try to do them pretty well. We're looking at events from the distant past, and these events are homicides in our case. There's no statute of limitations on a homicide in California. Unlike other crimes, if you do a robbery 5 or 7 years later, you're actually off the hook. If nobody catches you in that period of time, they can't catch you and bring you to trial. You get away with it because there's a statute of limitations on most every crime. But on homicides, there is no statute of limitations. If I can figure out who did the crime 50 years ago and that guy's still alive, I can go after him. So that's what we do. We look at events in the distant past. Now, typically, there are no living eyewitnesses. There's a reason why these cases went cold. They were crummy cases to begin with. So we don't have a lot of living eyewitnesses. We've got very little forensic evidence. I have never worked a case in which I was benefited by any DNA or forensic evidence. I mean, I wish that was the case. We thought that would be the case. We opened up 30 cold cases thinking one of these is going to have DNA, and none of them did. So we weren't able to make cases that way. We do it the old-fashioned way. We'll talk about that in a minute. We build convincing circumstantial cases the way that you and I are going to build today. And we'll see how we do that, okay? This is how we investigate cold cases. This is very similar to how you and I can look at investigating the Christian worldview. Because let's think about it. There's a claim about an event that occurred in the past. It's called the resurrection. It's called Christianity. It's an event in the distant past for which there are no living eyewitnesses, or no forensic evidence, but we can build a convincing circumstantial case. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to do that today related to a universe that has a beginning. And we're going to talk about that. But before I do, I want to give you 2 quick principles to keep in mind when you're working any kind of a case. The first one is that anything is possible. And that's why possible doesn't matter. I don't give a lick about what's possible. I don't allow juries to think about what's possible because anything is possible. It's possible we're not even here right now. That we've imagined this. We've been kidnapped by aliens. We're now on board their spaceship in which they're doing an elaborate mind control experiment. And then we're going to wake up tomorrow and find out none of this even happened. Isn't that at least possible? Yeah. But it's not reasonable, and that's the difference. Anything is possible, but not everything is reasonable. And this is really important when we do cold cases. It's really important in any trial that we do, is there's a big difference between what's possible and reasonable. We don't allow juries to speculate about what's possible. We only allow them to infer reasonably from the evidence. So, for example, I had a case years ago where a woman was killed by her husband. He was making really good money at a big firm, aircraft firm like Boeing, or I forget which one it was. I can't remember which firm it actually was, and it was in El Segundo. And he killed his wife because of his $800,000 pension. She was going to get, I think, $40,000 to $60,000. Not much of it, but he didn't want her to have any of it. And when she figured a way to get that money from him, he went over to her house and shot her in the head. Well, the defense attorney wanted to argue, hey, this could be a burglary. I mean, how do you know it's not a burglary? Why would you? Well, first of all, you can't allow to speculate about do you have any evidence that there's forced entry in the house? No. Any evidence anything was taken? No. Any evidence that the neighborhood's so bad it's plagued with burglaries? No. You have no evidence to support the notion of a burglary. You're just speculating now. And ladies and gentlemen, you're not allowed to go into the jury chambers and speculate about possibilities. If they've introduced evidence to support a burglary, great. You can reason through the evidence. But if they don't introduce any evidence, you're just speculating. And you're not allowed to do that in a jury room in California. Make sense? It's a big difference between what's reasonable and what's possible. People will throw things out at you. And so when someone says, Detective Wallace, isn't it true that blah? I'll always say, of course it's true. Because anything is possible, it's just not reasonable. Oh, hang on a minute, I object to that last part. Because they don't want to hear the whole thing in front of a jury. But I typically will say, yeah, of course, anything is possible, but not everything is reasonable. And that's what jurors have to make a distinction between. Okay, I'll put you through a little test right now to see if you guys would be a good jury before we even begin to look at the evidence in the universe for the existence of God. So we're pretending we're on a case together, and this is the suspect in our case. Oh, by the way, you ever notice how when you go to trial and you hear about it, maybe you're familiar with shows. I mean, this is one of the hard things about doing cases is you're constantly fighting the perceptions that people have about how cases are done, right? So there's a thing called the CSI effect. It's a problem for us because we have to actually, and we pick a jury like we did yesterday, we have to ask them questions about, do you understand that not everything you see on TV is possible to do? Techniques you see, I can't use a vacuum to vacuum up the DNA that's floating in the air. I can't cut the retina off the dead guy's eyeball to see what he last saw. I can't do these things, okay? But TV would have you think you can. And the same thing is true here. But you do hear all the time that people will talk about beyond a reasonable doubt. That is the standard. That's the judicial standard. It's not beyond any possible doubt. It's beyond a reasonable doubt. That's the judicial standard. And that's a standard we apply when taking a life of somebody other than ourselves and making an important decision about how he'll spend really the rest of his life. The defendant at that table, the jury has to make a decision about how he'll spend the rest of his life. And the standard is not whatever's possible, it's what's reasonable. Okay? So it's a decent standard for us when making a decision about how we're going to spend the rest of eternity. After all, the standard for how I decide you should live should be a lot higher than what I decide personally for me. Right? Because why should I make... Your standard should be really high when I decide, my opinion, I can decide this for myself, but don't decide it for me. Okay, the standard's higher. It's beyond a reasonable doubt for you. If that works for a stranger, it ought to work for us in making decisions about spiritual matters. So this is the reasonable judicial standard. Now, let's say we had a case where this young man commits a murder, and he does it by using this bat. He does it in the neighborhood that you live in. And when it goes to trial, it would be great if I could just call a witness in, somebody who actually saw the crime occur. Witnesses can be very powerful, especially if they've got persuasive personal testimony that seems to be filled with facts. So, for example, if she was to say, I live in this neighborhood, and I saw this guy right here, the guy I'm pointing to, I saw this guy do the murder. I know him personally. I've been living as his neighbor for the last 20 years. At his last birthday, I'm the one who gave him that shirt. Pretty persuasive. So yeah, I recognize him. I recognize the shirt I gave him for his birthday. I've been living next to him for 20 years. If you had a witness like that, would that be persuasive in your case? How many of you on the jury would have a hard time convicting this guy on the basis of just one eyewitness? It'd be hard because she's persuasive. She knows details about him. She recognizes him from 20 years of exposure. She gave him the shirt he happens to be wearing on the day of the murder. That's pretty powerful. That's called direct evidence. And really, eyewitnesses are the only form of direct evidence that's truly direct. Everything else is circumstantial. And sometimes people give circumstantial evidence a bad name. This is the second principle I want you to get today. Don't say it's just circumstantial evidence. Get rid of the just. This is the only form of direct evidence there is. Eyewitness evidence. Eyewitnesses can be wrong. Let's change this scenario a little bit, and let's create a circumstantial case that's similar to the kinds of cases that I get to do. And let's see how long before all of you will convict this guy. Okay? You're all in the jury right now. So let's begin it. We're going to change it. We're going to give him a mask. Oh, that changes everything. Because now the witness who sees the crime cannot identify who it was because he was wearing a mask. Now, I can tell you, she says, he's got a similar build to a guy that I know in the neighborhood. I've known for about 20 years, but I can't tell you for sure if it was him because I couldn't see his face. And he's wearing a shirt that's very similar to the one I gave this guy. But I mean, it's pattern. I can't tell you 100% if it's the exact same shirt. Now it's more difficult. Now our direct witness has been disabled in some way, right? So let's build a case, and you tell me when you think he's guilty. First of all, before we even begin, would that testimony of that eyewitness be enough for you to convict right now? How many of you in this room would convict this guy right now just based on what the witness can tell you? He looks the same general build as somebody I've known in the neighborhood for 20 years. Raise your hand if you'll convict. We're in South County. Somebody here is probably going to convict. No? All right, fine. How about, though, if when I interview a suspect I've got in mind, and I find this guy, and I interview him, and I get him in front, he matches the physical description. He's got the shirt that's kind of similar to the shirt that she recognized giving this person she identifies. And when I talk to him about his alibi, where were you yesterday for these 2 hours of this period of time? His alibi is all messed up. Not only does he not give me a reliable alibi, he gives me an alibi that when I do a little investigation, I determine it's a lie. He's telling me he's someplace else in town, but when I go there and interview those people, they're going, no, I haven't seen that guy in days. He's lying to me about his alibi yesterday. And he fits the general description. How many of you would convict on those two pieces of evidence? Anybody got a problem with him, though? Is he a person of interest yet? Sure, but you're not going to convict him yet, right? Okay, let's add another piece. Do a search warrant at his house, and he's got a bat in his closet. Well, you know a bat was used in this crime. Closer? Little closer. Anyone's got a bat. So you look at the bat very carefully, and on the bat, where typically you see the ball portion of the bat where it should be hit, it is completely dinged up and abused. Like it's not been used to hit baseballs or softballs. Whatever he's hitting with this bat, it's all messed up. So you think, I better test this thing, right, to see if there's any blood in this bat. So you do a little test, and you don't find any blood, but you do find the presence of bleach. You've got a dinged up bat that this guy bleached. How many of you bleach your baseball bats just to kind of, keep them clean? Nobody does that. BO alibi, fits the general description, bleached bat. How many of you are ready to convict this guy right now? 3. Now, notice what you've done is you've made a step, and you've got no direct evidence at all. All you have is just that silly circumstantial evidence. Yet you're starting to get closer, right? Let me add a few pieces and see if we're even closer. How about this one? At his house, you also recover a pair of Levi's. We know our suspect was wearing Levi's, but when you do there's no blood on these Levi's. But instead you find, after doing a luminol test, which is a luminescent test, you discover on the pants in a couple of locations they've been spot cleaned. That also will light up with luminol, like a 409 spot cleaner. Not bleach, but spot cleaned just in 2 places. There's other places where there's dirt on these pants. Why would he be spot cleaning pants when he's not willing to wash the pants where there's clearly dirt? He doesn't seem to be interested in the dirt. He could have spot cleaned the dirt off. He doesn't do that. He's spot cleaning something else off. He's got a bat that's bleached. He's got a BO alibi, and he matches the general description. Now, how many more are ready to convict this guy? A few more. Now, you get a chance to do an investigation here, and you recognize that at the crime scene there was no sign of forced entry at all. Whoever got in to do this crime, they walked in the front door or they were led in the front door. But there's no sign of burglary at the crime scene. Your investigation reveals that only 2 people had a key to this woman's house. Her mom and her boyfriend, who she got in a big blowout fight with the day before, who was your person of interest. Got away in the house with no forced entry, spot clean pants, bleached bat, BO alibi, and he fits the general description. How many more are ready to convict him? See, the rest of you are all waiting because I have all that black space to fill up, right? Let's fill it up. Okay, so you do your interview with this guy, and he says, yeah, I've been in a relationship with her for like 5 years, and yes, I had a big blow up with her yesterday, and yes, I threatened to kill her, and people heard me say I threatened to kill her, but I didn't kill her. He won't confess. But on his interview, he's clearly giving you everything leading up to that day, and it ain't good. But he's not confessing yet. But I didn't kill her. He's adamant about that. Anybody closer? I know, more black space. So you talk to your witness again, and you say, describe the shoes he was wearing. Well, he had this pair of hiking boots on. They were very unusual. They had a big band of leather on the side. I've never seen anything like that. You do a little research. You discover there's only one brand of shoe that makes this pair of hiking boots that has this big, wide band on the side. You start doing some research in the stores. You find there's one store in your county that actually sells it. In the last 2 years, they've sold 40 pairs. You do your search warrant. Who's got one of the 40 pairs? Your guy. 1 in 40 pair of shoes. All the stuff in his interview. The fact he's got a way to get in the house. He's got spot clean pants, bleached bat, BO alibi, fits the general description. I think we're getting close, don't you? Okay, let's do 2 more pieces. When you did that search warrant and you busted in that door, he was very distraught. And you apparently stopped him just before he was about to do something horrific because you found a note, a suicide note, in which he is claiming he's distraught over something he did yesterday, the day of the murder. But he doesn't say he murdered somebody. He just did something that made him incredibly distraught. That now he's willing to take his own life. Okay, one last thing. Your witness did say that when he ran out of the house with the baseball bat in hand, he ran to a car that she thought was an unusual car. She used to own one of these, so she recognized it, but she thought it was kind of unusual. She describes it for you as a 1974 ochre-colored Carmen Ghia. Not a lot of those around. As a matter of fact, you do a little research in DMV, you find that in the entire state of California, you've only got 2 running Carmen Gias in this condition. You can't find one of them, but when you open the garage door at his house, he happens to have a yellow 1974 Carmen Ghia. Do you see what we just did here? Now, is there anybody here who would have a hard time convicting this guy on the basis of just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 pieces of circumstantial evidence? Just 8 pieces of circumstantial evidence. Most of us would have no problem convicting. If I had 50 pieces of circumstantial evidence, all of which point to the same conclusion, you might conclude, hey, it's still possible he's innocent, but it's no longer reasonable that he's innocent. Because anything's possible, but it's not reasonable that this guy is either the most unlucky guy on the entire planet, all these bad coincidences have happened to him, or he's guilty. Those are the only 2 choices. And the most reasonable conclusion is he's guilty. What we do is we surround our point of conclusion with good pieces of evidence that point to the same conclusion. This is how we build circumstantial cases. We surround this guy completely with this evidence. Does that make sense? You've all been trained now in how to distinguish between direct evidence that can directly testify to the event under question. Eyewitnesses can do that. And these forms of circumstantial evidence, which makes sense if the circumstance is right. They make sense. And it just turns out the circumstance appears to be right. Circumstantial evidence, the biggest takeaway for us today is this. Remember that when you go into a court of law and you're on a jury, the judge will instruct you that there is to be no distinction made in terms of value between circumstantial evidence and direct evidence. That is an instruction in the jury code in the state of California. If that's good for juries, that's also good for us as Christians as we examine the Christian worldview. So today we're going to talk about creation. This is a creation conference, right? We want to talk about creation. So let's talk about this. If you came into this room today and you were the first person in the room and you thought the room was empty when you came in, but as you came in, you saw this soccer ball rolling across the room, what would be your conclusion? Somebody's there. Somebody's in the room. You're not alone. Why would you conclude that? Because the ball is moving across the room. If the ball was just sitting here, it's reasonable that the ball could be in an empty room. But if the ball is moving in the room, you suspect there's a cause. Why is that? It's something called the principle of causality. It's very reasonable. Very few people will actually doubt the principle of causality. It basically states that if these conditions are met, you've got a cause. Every effect has a cause. In this case, the effect is the rolling ball. Everything that begins has a cause. Did the ball have to begin to move? Yeah, unless it's been moving forever. It had to begin to move. Therefore, there must be a cause to why it is now moving. Is it changing in location? Yes. Anything that changes has to have a cause. Is it been rolling forever? Or is there a finite period of time in which it's been rolling? Yes, there is. Therefore, it has to have a cause. You see, these are the elements that we see these things. Also, the last one is it limited? It's not eternal. It's limited in space-time. It has to have a cause. This is simple physics. It's the principle of causality. And even a skeptic, like mentioned this morning, David Hume, would have to agree that this is a valid principle to use. Even a non-believing skeptic would have to say that, like he did, I never asserted so absurd a proposition as that anything might begin, without a cause. So we're going to take a look at this principle of causality, and we're just going to apply it to the universe and what's known as the cosmological argument. Cosmological just comes from the word cosmos, which means the whole universe. The whole universe. We better define what that means, the whole universe, because it's going to be important to our discussion. When you're looking at crime scenes, you have to clearly define what it is you're looking for, right? Here, when I say the whole universe, I've got something specific in mind, because this is the argument that is made classically that's called the cosmological argument. I'm going to make it in steps. If the foundation is, in any argument, the foundational proposition is like the most important proposition. So typically, if I'm on the stand and a defense attorney says, Detective Wallace, isn't it true that this, and that seems like a benign thing to admit. Well, he's clearly not asking me that question for no reason. He's trying to establish a first principle. If I say yes to this without thinking, he's going to lead me down a trail that ends where he wants me to end, because the first premise is the most important in the argument. So I think it's fair for skeptics to look at our argument and examine its first premise. But the first premise here is that the universe we live in has a beginning. Is that really controversial for us as Christians? No. But it is for a lot of people in science. And it was really until the beginning, about the first two decades of the 20th century. Second principle is this, that anything that has a beginning must have been caused by something else. No big deal here. It's the principle of causality. Therefore, the universe must have a cause if it has a beginning. So we've got to ask ourselves the question, what could cause this universe? This cause, I would argue, has to be eternal and uncaused, because we're living in something that's not eternal and not uncaused. Something cannot create itself, therefore, whatever it is that creates this, that causes this, cannot possess the same attributes. We're in a finite, caused universe. It must, therefore, have an eternal, uncaused cause. Make sense? Doesn't mean we're talking about God yet here, okay? I'm just saying, if we can explain it in some quantum physics, we'll look at some options here. But we have to say whatever causes it cannot, therefore, have a cause of its own, or we're going to ask ourselves, what's that cause? Whoever describes this, whoever's trying to deal with this issue, we're all looking for the same things. Theists and atheists alike. We're looking for the uncaused first cause. Make sense? Okay. And the last part here is that I would say that this cause is God, because I think our explanation of an eternal uncaused first cause is pretty close to what we believe is God. So, of course, again, like we said, that first principle, that's the big one. If the first principle is true, we're going to lead them right to the final conclusion. So, where do you think atheists and non-believers want to attack? They want to attack first principles. Is it true that the universe has a beginning? And when I say it has a beginning, let's define it now. I mean that everything came from nothing. Because that's how we have a beginning. When I'm describing the universe, I'm describing everything. What is everything? Simply put, everything is all space, time, and matter. Space, time, and matter. That's everything. That's the stuff that the universe is made of. Space, time, and matter. All of this comes from nothing. There's a point of beginning for all of this. That's important to keep in mind. Not that controversial. When I say everything, I'm saying all space, time, and matter. Okay? All right. We're going to talk today about something that's kind of controversial in the church. I don't think it should be. So I'm going to introduce it now, and I'm going to explain to you why I don't think it should be controversial. Because we're going to talk today about something called Big Bang cosmology. And for a lot of people, the whole idea of Big Bang, I reject that. Because they think Big Bang is synonymous with other concepts they have a good reason to reject. So I want to make sure we don't step off on the wrong foot. What do I mean when I'm talking about affirming? Because I believe we've got a good case for Big Bang cosmology. There's a reason why it's called the standard cosmological model. It still is the standard cosmological model in the sciences. Although I can tell you, lots of people want to reject it. You know why? Because it's evidence they don't want on the table. It points to our conclusions. And they want to move away from this. And they're trying harder and harder to get away from what still is the standard cosmological model, because it's great evidence for our worldview. And even Einstein, who was one of the first people to discover the principles here, wanted to reject it. So what do I mean when I say Big Bang Theory? What am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about the theory. Big Bang Theory is basically that everything comes from nothing. That's the most important assertion of Big Bang cosmology, that everything came from nothing at some point in the distant past. How far back it is, we'll talk about that in a minute. But I'm talking about, of course, all space, time, and matter. Are we clear? Space, time, and matter. Here's what Big Bang cosmology is not, and why I think so many of us as Christians reject it, okay? It's not the same as the theory of evolution. I can embrace Big Bang cosmology without giving a minute to the theory of evolution. All folks who embrace Big Bang cosmology are not evolutionists. Many creationists, many very fine creationists working in the field today embrace Big Bang cosmology, but reject the theory of evolution. And I think they've got a good reason to reject the theory of evolution. Look where it's leading us, by the way. The evolution perfected. But also, Big Bang theory is not a theory that mandates that you have to believe that the universe is ancient. Pastor Mark did a great job this morning of putting together the case for young Earth creationism. Well, the Big Bang does not talk about when it had to occur, just that it occurred. We can decide about how long ago that was. That's open to whatever position you hold on the age of the universe. You're free to still hold it because this theory says nothing about the age of the universe at all. It just says that the universe came from nothing. Make sense? So what I see people doing in the church right now is knee-jerking away from Big Bang cosmology because they believe it mandates a belief in evolution, which it doesn't, or that it mandates a belief in an ancient universe, which it doesn't. Okay? I can still reject those two things, but hold on to the truth statement that everything came from nothing. Remember, again and again, I'll say it 1,000 times, Big Bang theory is all about everything coming from nothing. That's how we're going to use it today. And there's good reason to believe that this is true, both from a biblical perspective of all I had was the biblical evidence, I'll show you that later, and from a scientific perspective. I'm somebody who believes that we have two books as Christians that we read from. We have special revelation given to us in Scripture. And Romans 1 tells us we have the book of natural revelation, that no one's got an excuse. Anyone who can see the nature around them should know that God exists, because enough has been told to us, according to Romans 1, that there's no excuse for you to reject the existence of God, given what we can see in creation. Okay? So there's two books I've got to look at. So we're going to talk about Big Bang cosmology in that context and in that context alone. Okay? Remember, this helps us because the idea that the Big Bang could be true, that should not be something that frightens us. Remember, a Big Bang, what? It requires a Big Banger. So what is the Big Banger? That's the question we have. Okay? That's where we're headed today. Let me give you 4 pieces of evidence that I think demonstrate that the universe has a beginning. And they are powerful evidences for us as Christians. The first, well, I'll just say where it comes from. There was a guy named Robert Jastrow. For years, he was the founder of and the director of the Goddard Institute. He wrote a book called God and the Astronomers. Great book, in which he kind of starts to talk about these. There's another good book called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. Have you seen that? Frank Turek and Norman Geisler wrote a book called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. I used to use it with my youth group to train them before we go to Berkeley. We'd go to Berkeley every year for a week, 5 days or so, and we would get on the campus with atheist groups. And these are all kids who have, they're all in their undergraduate or graduate work in ancient languages, in philosophy, in neuroscience, and we put them on the same stage with high school seniors who are Christians and prepare our high school seniors to be able to have this discussion. And you'd be amazed at how well your high school senior can hold up against some of the best. Berkeley I picked Berkeley for a reason. I went to UCLA. That's a pretty liberal school. That's a pretty anti-Christian school. But Berkeley is far more. So we picked that for a reason. And I've used these books. But Robert Jastrow gives us a couple pieces of lines of evidence. I want to use them today. The first is the second law of thermodynamics. I'm sure that some of you have heard about this law. I've given it to you on the board here, thermodynamics. It's also called the law of increased entropy. The idea here is basically, in a nutshell, that over time, the amount of usable energy decreases. It also talks a little bit about how the amount of disorder increases. This thing called entropy. But the idea here is that over time, usable energy becomes more and more neutral and benign until finally the universe will reach what's kind of known as a heat death. The idea of usable energy. And this is only true in systems that are closed. So unless we can demonstrate that the universe is not a closed system. So the Earth itself, I've seen people try to use entropy arguments on the Earth. Not as easy to do because the Earth is really not a closed system. It has the universe feeding causal agents to the Earth. So the Earth's not really a fixed closed system. But the universe, we've got to demonstrate, unless you can figure out what's outside the universe, that could be importing information, importing causal agents into the universe, we would consider the universe to be a fixed system, an isolated system. And basically, usable energy is irretrievably lost, disorganization, randomness, and chaos increase. Now, look, most of us understand entropy, at least in its most kind of basic fundamental forms. We've heard the term used in science classes, and we see it kind of in our experience in the world around us, right? I mean, you know that over time, whatever is pristine, whatever is perfect, becomes less perfect. Everything seems to move from order to disorder in the real world in which we live. That's an aspect of this law of entropy that most of us can kind of put our hands around as an analogy at the very least. The idea of an increase in disorder, an increase in chaos, as usable energy becomes less and less usable. But that's not the aspect that works for us as Christians when describing the universe. Think about it for a second. If I have a car and I fill the tank up, right? And at some point it runs out of gas. That tells me something. And I've got no way to get more gas in the tank. If I put that gas in the tank, 20 gallons, and I drive it, how long can I drive on it? Anybody got any idea? What are you guys driving right now? I'm driving a 2004 Hyundai Sonata. Okay? Car of champions. Right? And it's probably getting about 26 miles to the gallon, if I'm really lucky. If I fill that puppy up, how far can I go? How long can I drive it before it runs out of gas? And the fact that it runs out of gas tells me that at some point in the past, at a fixed moment, I put gas in it. I can only run so long on that amount of gas. The fact that we are seeing that usable energy is dissipating tells us that at a point in the fixed past, we had a point of all the energy being present. If the past was infinite, if we're living in a universe that has no beginning, we should have run out of energy by now. Right? But we haven't yet because we live in a universe that has a fixed past. We're not on an eternal gas tank that's constantly being refilled. We're on a gas tank that had one filling, and as we see it reach empty, it tells us that it had a point in the past fixed in which it was filled. Does that make sense? See, it's kind of like we're living in a universe that's been wound up. And you know if you've got a wind-up toy, at some point it begins to unwind. If you go back in time, you find that as you go back in time, just 20 seconds, that wind-up toy was completely tightly wound. As much as you can wind it. Then you let go of it and it unwinds. The fact that you have a toy that's unwinding in front of you tells you that the toy was wound at a specific point in the fixed past. Make sense? The law of entropy actually tells us that we're living in a universe that had a fixed beginning. Just by itself it tells us that. But of course we're building a circumstantial case, so let's add additional pieces of evidence. We have the second law of thermodynamics. We also have the expansion of the universe. Look, when Einstein did the special theory of relativity in 1905, he started working with principles that told him that there's a relationship and a beginning. Certainly by the time he's got the general theory of relativity in 1915, he understood a couple of basic principles. One, there's a beginning. In order for his theory to work, there's a beginning to space, time, and matter. And Einstein did not like it. Not a theist, not somebody who wanted to come to theistic beginnings, but he saw that his theorems were actually affirming a beginning of space, time, and matter. And by the time he's got this general theory of relativity in 1915, he's also discovering that his theorems predict and indicate that we're in an expanding universe that's expanding outward. His work was picked up by a guy named Vesto Slipher, who a Russian mathematician who found a way, just using math, which God bless him how they do. I don't know how to do that kind of thing, but he was able to affirm and actually confirm the work of Einstein. But they weren't alone. Astronomers were also seeing something that was starting to give them pause. As a matter of fact, a guy named, did I say Vesto Slipher? No, I was talking about Friedman. Alexander Friedman was the Russian mathematician. Vesto Slipher was in Arizona, well actually in Indiana, born in Indiana, raised in Indiana, educated in Indiana, but for his entire career he served in Arizona as an astronomer. And doing work, he's starting to see nebula that he thinks are expanding away. And he's starting to develop theories about how light waves change when objects are moving away from you or when objects are moving toward you. He gives a conference, and in that conference is sitting this guy, a guy we know as Edwin Hubble. Hubble later is responsible for the Hubble telescope. He's credited with redshift. The law of redshift is sometimes called the Hubble law. But it was really Vesto Slipher who's first working on this theory in 1914, at the same time that Einstein is working on the general theory of relativity, confirming the same facts in 1915. Two lines of thought, both confirming the same idea. We're in a universe that's expanding. And how he does this is he's looking at lights, looking at the light spectrum from stars and nebula in the universe, and he observes this phenomena. As objects are moving toward the telescope, they shift toward purple or blue. The light wave shifts toward blue. As objects are moving away, they shift toward red. And he's beginning to see that the galaxies around us are shifting toward red. Everything is expanding outward. Imagine it like this. If I had a balloon and I drew on the balloon little galaxies and I started to blow it up, it would look like this. You would see that these galaxies are moving away from the center. They're red shifting. Why is this important to us? Because if we remember the wind-up toy in entropy? If we run it backwards, we have a point in the fixed past in which everything is tightly wound. Run this backwards. The balloon contracting means that at a point in the distant past, we had a place in which everything we see in the universe is located at a place of cosmic singularity. See the problem? This confirms the same thing that the law of entropy does, that we have a beginning to space, time, and matter. And you'll notice that these are sometimes independent things. Some of these things say more about space than they do about time. Some things say more about time than they do about matter, and so on. Third piece of evidence, radiation echo. This is an observation that was made by these two men, Arno Penzias and Robert Wilson, back in the 60s. And this is them in 1978 standing in front of the machine they used in order to read and measure this radiation they were seeing in the universe. I've got an updated picture taken, I think, just a few years ago. The same two men, they're still alive, at least at that time. They look like this now, standing in front of the same device. But we've had a lot better research done. We launched COBE, not the Lakers COBE, but this COBE, the Cosmic Background Explorer, was launched in the 80s. It's provided us with a ton of material. Now it's able to get outside the atmosphere and just look at the universe on its own and take pictures like this one that show us this kind of uniformity of microwave background radiation. Well, it turns out that those people who were predicting Big Bang cosmology, the idea that at some point in the distant past everything came from nothing, predicted if this is the case, we ought to see some evidence of that first cosmic expansion. Well, it turns out we do have evidence of it. It's called the microwave background radiation. Think of it this way. If I let off a hand grenade in this room, there'll be a point at which there'll be a lot of heat in the room, right? But eventually the dust will settle, but you'll still have dust in the air. We use flashbangs all the time in SWAT, right? You're trying to get into a building. You want to distract the person you're trying to actually enter on. They're over in this part of the room. You throw a flashbang in this part of the room. It's a big noise. I mean, it's a big noise. And it leaves ringing in your ears. You're disoriented. There's dust all over the room. It's a mess, right? And it gives us a chance to get in without being seen, to get in and surprise somebody. Well, what we're seeing in the cosmic background radiation is the mess and the ringing in your ears after the flashbang. We see it in the universe. It's more evidence of a point of initial singularity. So in addition to these three pieces, I'll add one last piece of evidence, at least in terms of illustrating it for you here. And that is the philosophy of infinite regress. Even if you aren't comfortable and you're talking to a friend in the workplace about the evidence in the universe that points to a creator, and you don't want to hop into second law of thermodynamics, you don't want to hop into cosmic background radiation. I mean, who wants to do this? We can make the case just based on this simple philosophy, the philosophy of infinite regress. I will give it to you in a way that I've tried to train students with it. I call it the cosmic racetrack. Imagine I put you on this 100-yard dash racetrack, and I line you all up at the start line, and I give every one of you a lane, and you get there and you go, okay, cool. I tell you, look, all you got to do is run down there 100 yards. When you cross the finish line, whoever crosses the finish line wins. Duh. I watched the Olympics. I know how that works. Okay. So you get all lined up, and I give you starting blocks. Why don't you have a good shot? Put your starting blocks in. You nail those things in. And you get your feet set in the starting blocks like everyone else should do, right? You learn, you watch the TV, you know how to do this. And you're ready to go. But as you're standing there at the start line, ready to take off in your starting blocks. And you're counting down, and I have my starter's pistol in my hand. And you're waiting for me to pull the trigger to start the race. In the milliseconds before I pull the trigger, I say, stop! Everybody, take your blocks, pull them up, move them back 6 inches. You're like, dang. But you're obedient, so you take them and you move them back 6 inches. We get all ready to go, you're all back in place again, you're ready to start again, but just seconds before I pull the trigger, I say, stop! Move them back 6 inches. That's kind of frustrating, don't you think? You want to start the race, but I keep on moving the start line back 6 inches. I just continue to do this. Every time you're ready to start the race, I stop you in the seconds before starting, and I tell you I want you to move the thing back 6 inches. And I continue to do it, and do it, and do it, and I'm driving you nuts. Do you realize that if I will not allow you to get started, you're not going to get to the finish line? You're never going to get to that finish line unless I set the line you start from and allow you to start from that line. If I keep on pushing the start line back, you'll never get to the finish line. Imagine that the finish line is today. It's right now. It's this moment we're hearing this. It's this moment we're talking to each other. We can't get to today unless there's a fixed starting line of time. Follow me? If time is like the racetrack, you keep on moving back, moving back, moving back, you can't get to today. Clearly, time's got a beginning, because if there's no beginning, we couldn't be here and talk about it. This is called the philosophy of infinite regress, because without a beginning, you can't reach a finish line, and the same thing is true for time. Without a beginning, you can't even get to today. Make sense? So we've made this argument from a couple of pieces of evidence that are physical and scientific in nature, and one piece of evidence that is philosophical in nature. And if you wanted to do more, there's lots of research out there right now. There's probably about 40 or 50 lines of evidence that support Big Bang cosmology. This is a problem for all those professors and skeptics who want to move away from this, because, let's face it, Big Bangs require a Big Banger. That irritates a lot of skeptics. But I won't go through all of these. Could you imagine if my lecture today is to go through all of these pieces of evidence? You shoot yourself in the head. I wouldn't blame you. We're not going to do that. I've just listed 30 or so here today. So if I made a case about this guy we started with, we made this case by moving through several pieces of evidence, 8, that all point to the same conclusion. Let's not make a case against our bad guy right now. Let's go make a case about the beginning of a universe, that we are in a universe that has a beginning. We've used several pieces of evidence now, and we've surrounded this hypothesis with good evidence. All of this evidence points to the same conclusion, that we're living in a universe that has a beginning. All the other pieces of evidence I told you about, if we stack them in there, they're all going to point to the same conclusion. We're living in a universe that has a beginning. This is a pretty powerful circumstantial case. Is it a direct evidence case? No. Does that matter? No. If it didn't matter for our suspect, it doesn't matter for this. Now, before we finish, I want to just offer you a couple of pushbacks you might get from friends who, because other ideas about our origins, other cosmological concepts have come up in the last 30 years that are very popular today. Let's take a look at a couple of them. Because is Big Bang cosmology really the best and most accurate way to describe this we're seeing? Maybe not. There's another set of thinking out there. This is some examples of this. Alexander Vilenkin is a proponent, for example, of multiverse theory. You probably heard a lot about multiverse. Multiverse theory typically is thrown out by skeptics, tossed in our lap, because we will argue, as I've also argued, that the fine-tuning of our universe that makes life possible is a very strong evidence for a creator who intended for life to be possible, because the odds of life, of all the cosmological constants, the universal constants being so perfectly fine-tuned to allow life to exist in our universe is ridiculous. And they know it. So if there's only one universe and it's fine-tuned like this, it does kind of incline you toward a fine-tuner. So how they get around that is they say, no, there's not just one universe, there's multiverses. If I've got enough universes, one of them probably will have the odds for life. And I've just taken out the odds, right? Because I said, hey, there's an infinite number of multiverses. So this is one theory that's come up. The other is quantum theory. And guys like Lawrence Krauss, who was just on Colbert Report, he advocates this kind of thing. He wrote a book called A Universe from Nothing. Let's talk about the first one, multiverse theories. These don't do anything to get rid of the problem of a beginning. They just take the beginning, because you still got to say, well, where do the multiverses come from? Same problem, right? So multiverse theory is not going to solve the problem of cosmic singularity. It's not going to get rid of a beginning. The beginner now is even more wow for this beginner. This beginner is making all these multiverses. How is this happening naturally? Remember, the beginner can't have a beginner, because then that beginner is the one you should be looking at, right? I mean, we're looking for an uncaused first cause. Multiverse theory does not hurt us. How about this one, though? This guy comes on the air and he says, hey, it's sure, something can come from nothing. Happens all the time in quantum physics. This idea that you can't get something, you can't get the universe from nothing, that's stupid. You can get the universe from nothing. Happens all the time. He said this on Colbert. Physics has changed what we mean by nothing. Empty space is a boiling, bubbling brew of virtual particles popping in and out of existence. If you wait long enough, that kind of nothing will always produce particles. Now remember when we started, we said, when I say everything, the universe, what do I mean? All space, time, and matter. That's what the universe is made of. Lawrence is cheating. Do you see how he's cheating? Physics has changed what we mean by nothing. Empty space, whoa. Where'd that come from? You're assuming it exists already. If you wait long enough, well, where did time come from? Oh, so let me get this right. If you start off with space and time, you can get matter? I'll give you that. Where did space and time come from? This is why it's so important to be clear on our terms. When we say everything came from nothing, we mean all space, time, and matter. Lawrence doesn't get it. He wants to steal space and time and say, I can get matter. Well, no, okay, duh. I'm sure that's possible. But our problem is, where does space and time come from? You're cheating, Lawrence. You've redefined nothing to mean space and time are already there. It's kind of like a kid who goes in the refrigerator and sees all this good food, right? You've all had kids like this. I've got kids like this. One sitting right there. Every morning he gets up and he goes out into a fast food joint and buys breakfast. Why? He could make breakfast out of the refrigerator, but if he looked in the refrigerator, he'd probably say, there's nothing in the refrigerator to eat. There's tons in the refrigerator to eat. You just don't like what you see. Don't call that nothing. That's something. This is what Lawrence Krauss does when he argues that something can come from nothing. He simply redefines nothing. Let's go back to our argument, and we'll close with this. Well, one more thing I want to say. There might be another explanation for this cause. We talked about these aspects of our argument, right? These principles that lead to a conclusion, number 5. And we talked about how important it is to have we've demonstrated the truth of the first premise. But why should the last resulting conclusion be God? Couldn't it be something other than God? I would say, well, I argue that it is God because of the nature of this first cause. Whatever that cause is, it has to be uncaused. Or we're going to simply ask the question, who caused it? By the way, when someone says, who caused God? That's a stupid question. Why? Because the definition of God is the uncreated one. The uncreated creator of everything. So when you say, who created the uncreated one? Definition, he's the uncreated one. You see, by definition, we're all looking for the uncreated thing that starts all of it, right? We all have that same burden. It's either a naturalistic uncaused first cause or it's a supernatural uncaused first cause. But whatever it is, it has to be uncaused. Okay. And whatever it is, it has to be pretty dang powerful to create everything from nothing. So now we're looking for something that's an all-powerful, uncaused thing. But worse than that, I think that the cause of the universe is personal. Jimmy taught me this. We were in Berkeley the first year, I think it was the first year, second year, and you were reading J.P. Moreland's, I think, Philosophical Foundations for a Christian Worldview. That's where you got it, right? I know you cheated. You didn't think this up. And so we're talking about this at Berkeley, and I made all the students do a presentation in the last couple of days we're there to the rest of the group on some crazy off-the-wall thing. Jim's was on the personhood of the first cause. And it makes sense if you think about it. Why would I argue from science alone that the creator of the universe, whatever creates the universe, must be personal? I can see why I would say it's got to be uncaused. I can see why I could say it's all-powerful, but why would I argue it has to be personal? Here's why. I want you to think of impersonal forces. There are lots to choose from. Gravity is an impersonal force. If we're in a gravitational-free environment, like these two hovering spheres are, they're just going to float around. But this is how impersonal forces work. The minute an impersonal force is introduced into the environment, you feel its effect. The minute an impersonal cause, an impersonal force enters the environment, you feel its effect. If I introduce gravity to this room, what's going to happen? The minute I introduce it, these two balls are going to feel its effect instantly. That's the way impersonal forces work. The minute you introduce them, you feel their effect. Now think about it for a second. Gravity can't say, no, not yet, not yet, no, not yet, not yet, now. And then the balls drop. The minute it shows up, you feel its effect. Let's go back to our universe for a second. If the cause of this universe is impersonal, it means the minute it begins to exist, you feel its effect, the beginning of the universe. If the cause of the universe is impersonal, it's only as old as the universe itself, because the minute it came into the environment, which you can't really use as a spatial term, but the minute it exists, you feel its effect. If the cause of the universe is impersonal, it's only as old as the universe itself. Make sense? The same as gravitational pull on the two spheres. Then you've got a problem. Where did it come from? Whatever it is that caused this is only the same age as this. Where did that come from? But we know whatever we're looking for is uncaused. Therefore, it has the ability to do something crazy. It has the ability to decide to start the universe. And the ability to decide, that is a property of personhood. There is no impersonal force that has the ability to decide. Only personal forces, like you and I, free agents. There's event causation, there's agent causation. We are free agents, so is God. He can do this, He can make a decision. This is an attribute of personhood. That's why it's so important. When we look at this, these are the three things I see. Whatever caused this universe, it has to possess all of these characteristics. What could possess these characteristics better than the God of the Bible? And so we look at this and we say, hey, these characteristics look pretty much like a personal God of some sort. Let's take a look and see if there's anything in Scripture to affirm our understanding of what we just talked about today. Is there anything in the Bible that talks about any of this crazy stuff we talked about? There's a lot. I'll give you a few places you can go to look. We'll start in Psalms, okay? We'll start in Psalm 102, where it says, in the beginning you laid out the foundations of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you remain. They will wear out like a garment. Do you see what he's saying here, the psalmist? What's he describing? Second law of thermodynamics. Yeah, we're in a universe that's wearing out like a garment. Pretty interesting observation for an ancient Jew living without a telescope, without any aspect to media, can't get on online and Google this, yet makes the declaration that we're living in a universe that's wearing out. That's interesting. Lucky guess. Also, you can look at this, Isaiah 45. 45:12 says, it's I who made the earth and who created mankind upon it. My own hand stretched out the heavens. I marshaled their starry hosts. You see this language all the time. It's probably just some kind of coincidental language of the ancient Jews. But it sure sounds like God is in the business of stretching out the heavens. And our science tells us that the heavens are stretching. They are expanding. Genesis 1:1. Well, this is pretty obvious. Do I need to actually even circle this? We're in a universe that has a beginning. And finally, let's go to this one. This is, I think, a better one. 1 Corinthians 2. Here's what it says. We do, however, speak a message of wisdom among the mature, but not the wisdom of this age or of the rulers of this age who are coming to nothing. No, we speak of God's secret wisdom, a wisdom that has been hidden and that God destined for our, and what does he say here? For our glory before time began. It's just like poetic language, like fairy tale language, right? So you have to look at this case we're making here. I think the scriptures do describe the God we see in cosmology. I don't think that our position as Christians is unique, though, in doing this. If I was a Muslim, I could very easily use the same evidence to point to Allah. Right? All-powerful, uncaused first cause, personal. I think you have to make an additional step. I sometimes do talks about the reliability of Scripture, but I'm a Christian really not because of any of this. I'm a Christian because I looked at the Gospel of Mark and we became convinced that it was an eyewitness account from Peter. That's how I became a Christian. Now afterwards I realized that the evidence does support my theistic conclusions. But I'm a Christian rather than a Muslim or a Mormon. I've got 6 brothers and sisters who were raised in the LDS church because my dad's second wife is LDS. I'm not a Mormon because they don't even have cosmology that matches this. They believe in an infinitely old universe with an infinite number of gods begetting other gods with no beginning. Science does not affirm what Mormons believe about cosmology, but it does affirm what we believe. So I hope you'll see that if nothing else, the creation points to a creator, especially when looking at just the universe itself.